now call the meeting to order. Citizens' concerns.
Hi, I'm Tara Fredericks. I'm a small business person from West Acton. And West Acton Center is a gem. It's rare for a neighborhood center to have a locally owned bookstore, a store like Tables to Teapots, and a locally owned independent pharmacy, as well as auto shops. None of these are big chain stores, and all are at risk of being lost. I'm worried because the sewer promotional material says that it will help West Acton businesses. It certainly will help some with big, deep pockets. But for very small businesses, it's not looking like it's going to be very affordable. I don't know for sure, but I've done some calculations, and like the people that own New London Pizza that also rent to Unicorn Bookstore and Tables to Teapots will have a betterment fee in the order of $300,000, and Sal's Auto will have something over $400,000. I was at a meeting, the West Acton Merchants Association meeting, and someone said that if they had to bear the cost of that they would go out of business, and that they would sell to condo developers. Another person said, well, don't worry, because then condo developers will put stores on the first floor. And I said, I don't think zoning requires that. And so we wrote to the planning department, and they confirmed that the zoning does not require that, so they could put condos everywhere. So anyways, I feel like it's important to be clear on the promotional material that some businesses will gain and some businesses will lose. And I think, personally speaking, it's a big risk that we should be much more clear of before we sell things like that with a declarative statement that it'll help business. Thank you.
Anyone else? This morning, we were at Ice House Pond at the Arbor Day celebration. And I must compliment the children's librarian. There were half a dozen little people there who were pretending to be trees and leaves and trunks, and it was great fun to watch them. We all took a shovel and helped plant the tree. And my compliments to the librarian and the DPW building who arranged it all. It was really a delightful ceremony. Excuse me. This Thursday there'll be an open house at the Senior Center, so those who are interested should come. It's been a very successful center. John, do you have anything?
Thank you. I just want to thank MassCorps, the Mass Department of Correctional Facilities, the people who built our new tables. So thank you. They did a great job. Thanks to the correctional folks in the correctional facilities. The open house that you mentioned on September 26th, which is this Thursday, is from 1 to 3 p.m. One of the many great things we'll be doing that afternoon is we'll have folks there from different departments and initiatives at tables to help people that attend understand some of the things that are going on in town. One group that will be there is Paul Campbell, our town engineer. And if you have questions about the impacts to businesses with how the potential sewer project would impact them, I would encourage you to ask him for information about the betterments. I think some of the numbers referenced earlier in this evening, I don't know that they're consistent with the numbers that we're working with, so I'd encourage you to talk to the engineering department if you have questions about your betterment. And there'll also be a group of local residents who are helping the town with the Acton Power Choice program. If you are a resident and you have electricity at your house, you should have received a postcard like this week, or maybe you'll get it tomorrow. This is information about the new Power Choice program, which just started, and there are 3 options for you to participate. The standard is to just not do anything, and you'll be in the Power Choice standard and get 10% renewable electricity as part of your what you buy, or you can upgrade to 100% renewable. And we also have a opt-down option for people. So the program is very similar to the last time, but we have some folks who have volunteered to go down there and encourage you to bring your Eversource bill. Bring your Eversource bill, and they can explain, and we can explain to you what what it is and how this program relates to what you see on your line items on your bill, because sometimes it's confusing. So ActonPowerChoice.com, and also check that out this Thursday at the Human Services and Senior Center facility. Thank you.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes,
I just asked a quick question of the manager.
of course.
Mr. Mangiarotti, I've heard a rumor going around, I've seen it on social media a couple of spots, folks speculating about the potential dog park, and that there's some consideration that when and if a dog park is built, dogs will be prohibited from all other recreational areas and conservation areas. And I was wondering if you could use your good offices to speak with those the appropriate people in conservation and recreation, see if that's under consideration or not. I think it could have some impact on the dog park support.
Certainly we'll look into that. That's the first I've heard of that type of restriction. So we are preparing a number of information points for the board's review at your next meeting based on the presentation last meeting and all the questions that the board had. So we'll add that to the list of questions and issues to make sure we report on in a few weeks.
Thank you.
The next item of business is the building site setback request at 127 Strawberry Hill Road.
This is a matter that I believe Roland is here to answer any questions. The information was provided in the packet with regard what is being considered. And the town has been asked by the current owners of 127 Strawberry Hill Road to consider the restriction and the setback. Roland, are you available to provide a more detailed review update on this, please?
Well, first of all, the owner, the Shirlers are here, so you might want to hear from them too. I try to summarize it in the memo that you have in front of you, but this goes back to the late 80s, early 90s, when the DeMari farm was taken out of Chapter 61. At that time, the town had the right of first refusal to buy the land, and instead it negotiated certain numbers of restrictions on the land that had to do with where houses could be built. And one of those restrictions was the 200-foot setback line on Pope Road. It is nowhere really clear as to why it is 200 feet, why Pope Road was selected, why Strawberry Hill Road was not selected. I can only surmise that Pope Road was designated a scenic road in the town of Acton, and so people were honing in on that. Strawberry Hill Road is a scenic road also. So in any case, that restriction was put in place, and then the Board of Selectmen, and I'm not bothering with the dates here, but the Selectmen then signed a certificate waiving that restriction with respect to this one lot. Developer went bankrupt, foreclosure happened, the Concord Cooperative Bank took over, and again, it is unclear where the initiative came from, but there was an attempt, or the restriction was the Concord Cooperative Bank signed a restriction or a document that reinstated that 200-foot setback restriction on that lot. And sequentially, then Concord sold the lot to the then owner, and the restriction was signed by one party, but not by the town of Acton. That didn't happen until a year later, and then it wasn't recorded until 6 months after that. And so, as we reviewed the matter with council, and it is clearly a foggy situation as to whether the restriction that is on the record now is in fact valid or not. And so the whole context of this whole thing is that the owner wants to divide the lot and build a house somewhere on the property, presumably within the 200-foot setback restriction. And so the question came to me, and I had to defer to the board to sort of make the call on it, because it seemed like I couldn't make that call by myself. It wasn't an interest that it was an interest that the board had imposed, and so that's why it's being brought to you.
Thank you.
Is that a good enough summary of the situation? Dean, you've been around too at the time, so. But
Sure.
Just one question. So when the restriction was reapplied when Concord Cooperative signed the agreement, you said that it was a clause or something in the agreement to reapply the 200-foot restriction. Do you know why that was in there?
no, I don't have that. The paper trail doesn't document why the attempt was made, or why it seemed prudent to reinstate it. I have no idea what the impetus or the motivation was for that. Nor do I really know why it was waived in the first place. I just don't know. There's nothing in the record, and my memory doesn't go that far back. Not quite.
I understand. I was wondering whether it could have been accidental, with some verbiage copied, and maybe it made its way in there, or. If you don't know, you don't.
I mean, the certificate of waiver on the setback restriction for that lot 9, I believe it is, that seems very intentional. It clearly spells it out, and it's signed. It's not an accident. Whether the attempt to reinstate it, it doesn't really look like an accident either, except then the parties didn't sign it, and meanwhile, on the same day, and then meanwhile the land was conveyed. And so the question is did the owner or the buyer have adequate notice?
Dean?
Yeah, and my memory is also a little foggy. I was working for the town at the time, and I'm somewhat familiar with what happened. Just to put it in context, there was a lot of concern that this was sort of the first big development that was going to happen on Pope Road, and a lot of concern about the loss of rural character. Why they chose a 200-foot setback, I'm not really sure. I know subsequent to this, when the Dustin Farm was subdivided further up Pope Road, a similar restriction was put in place there, and the development for that little subdivision is all set way back off a very deep easement or a restricted line. So right. It's exactly whether there was a fault in the way all of this took place or not, I'm not really sure, but I know that there was a lot of concern at that point because this area was, up until this point, had pretty much been untouched by development.
Right.
One point that I'd like to raise is not looking at whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. This particular lot has been a problem as far as visibility or vehicles coming from the Concord line on Strawberry Hill Road because it's not a 90-degree intersection. And people, when they pull up to the stop sign on Strawberry Hill Road and look down Pope Road towards Route 2A, have a very hard time seeing. The landowners have been gracious in the past with allowing the town to cut some brush and that sort of thing on their property, and I believe the town even realigned the stone wall there at some point, and certainly that helped. But I know since in the last year or so, Public Works Department has done a safety corridor study of Strawberry Hill Road. I don't know if they specifically addressed the misalignment of that intersection or not, but I would think if we could work something out which would allow the town to do a little more work on the intersection and realign it and solve some of the safety problems, this could be a mutual benefit to both the public and the property owners. Just throw that out as a point of consideration that you could certainly think about at some point in the future. Thank you.
John?
Yes, I would support strongly Dean's suggestion. I drove up Strawberry Hill Road from the Concord line this morning, and that is a very difficult, if not dangerous, intersection to negotiate a left turn. Roland, we all received a note from Ann Forbes late this afternoon bringing the historic perspective to the property, and she asked that we bring the Historical Commission into the conversation. Is that something you would think is appropriate?
Well, you could. The question you might ask is, what would the town be protecting here? And one is, of course, is the scenic road value of Pope Road. The jurisdiction of the Historical Commission under their charter of the town bylaws is to preserve the buildings, to keep them from being demolished, or at least to look to see if there could be alternatives for demolishing the buildings. That's not what's being proposed here. It's about, where does an additional house on the lot go? So they might certainly have some valid input as to, how the historic lay of the land is here, and they might have some good suggestions. But I just wanted to be clear, it's not about demolishing the existing house, which is from around 1850. That's not what's on the table here. But the letter from Ann Forbes prompted me to take a look at the aerial photographs another time, at the street views, and it depends on what the town wants to protect here. Pope Road is a solid tree buffer. To the house, and Strawberry Hill Road is sort of open. There is a brush line on Strawberry Hill Road, but you can look in. And the house itself actually relates to Strawberry Hill Road. The old portion, the front entrance, relates to Strawberry Hill Road. You can't see it from Pope Road. So it's just, what is here more valuable to protect, and putting the question out.
You have
Well-
to take the microphone, identify yourself.
I'm one of the property owners, Suzanne Schuller, and our argument is, in order to protect the beauty of the historic property, that is why we'd like to forego the 200-foot setback. If we respect the 200-foot setback, it causes us we're planning to divide the land, but the land would have to be divided in such a way that the new property that was built would sort of aesthetically infringe upon the historic property, because it would be so close and not aesthetically appealing. So.
Anyone else on the board? I drive that road because I'm on Spring Hill Road, and that corner with its visibility, if you're coming up Pope Road, cars are pulling into the intersection to see, and it's very dangerous when you're coming up Pope Road.
Right.
And I don't know what we can do about that corner.
Well, as Dean mentioned, there was a Strawberry Hill Road safety study that was recently completed, and I can't tell you what it says about that intersection, but I think I recall it said something about that intersection. Right. There are some recommendations, so we can look at that. And, just what I failed to do on my memo is the 200-foot setback. Pretty much imagine a line cutting through the lot in the middle from Pope Road in. It cuts the lot about in half. So just so you get a sense of the positioning of the additional house where it could be if the 200-foot setback line were to remain in place.
Thank you. Tara?
Yes, I remember, like Dean remembered, it was to protect the character of the town. If, in fact, the 200 prevents us from protecting the character of the town, I would be in favor of supporting it. But I recognize that the waiver was respective to a specific project that somebody liked and decided that the waiver was worthwhile because of that project. Either way, I'd like to see drawings. I'd like to see them at the table with the Historic District Commission architects that can look at it. And, you know, for me, even if I was behind the table, I wouldn't want to rule on something historic character without letting the folks that specialize on that weigh in. And I don't think they saw this until 2 days ago. So I hope that you wait like a week or two, because Anne said that she thinks or hopes that you'll wait. I said, what indication did you have of that waiting? And she said, no, she had none, but she was hoping. So thank you.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I would move that we lay this on the table for a short period of time so that we can gather a little bit more information. I think I don't want to unduly delay the project for the owners, and as I said, they have been very accommodating in the past as far as the safety improvements there. But I think it would be good if we did have a chance to think about this a little bit more, have the appropriate folks here in Town Hall look at the safety study, have the historic people have a chance to weigh in on it. I think if town manager could take that in hand and speak with the appropriate people in engineering, public works, and historic, and then bring it back at a subsequent meeting, probably not the next meeting, but maybe the meeting after, so that we can move this thing along.
John, did you have something?
I would second that motion.
Okay, motion made and seconded. John? All right. All in favor?
Can I ask one, tell you one more? Would it be helpful to provide a sketch of where the property would have to be and how much it would infringe on the historic house if we respect the 200-foot setback? Because I think it would be clearer to the Historic Commission that it's a deficit rather than an advantage to respect that if we provided where the house would have to sit.
I think that would be very helpful.
Very helpful.
I think what we're concerned about is this corner here.
Well, yeah, that's a separate issue, I think, and that we're very willing to address that. I mean, that's not a problem. But as far as the Historic Commission's issue, which seems to be the thing that is the new thing that arose recently, I think if they saw a small sketch to see how close the new building would sit to the historic property, they understand the deficit to the historic property rather than our proposal, which would be to situate the house in a way that it does not affect the historic property. Because we take great pride in our property. If anyone knows that property, the gardens, I mean, we really do take pride, and we don't want to infringe on the property. But the 200-foot setback would force us to.
Right. Okay, motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. John?
I was just going to suggest that if the owners had any additional comments, that they provide them for us before we, to help us. It sounds like you just did, though. So, but if there's anything further that you think would help as we prepare to come back in a few weeks.
Yeah, we would definitely be willing to sit down with. Thank you. Yeah, of course, my wife and I would be willing to sit down with the commissioner, with the town, maybe pick an afternoon and bring all the kind of drawings that we have done already to think about this so that we can get a solution that works for everyone.
Thank you.
And we are around.
Okay. So, adopt a street application, Christmas Motors.
The board adopted an adopt the street policy last year as part of our efforts to, combined efforts to work on street calming, traffic calming rather, roadside maintenance and sprucing up different areas. And when there's people that are interested in helping, we wanted to create a mechanism to allow them to do so. This is Mr. Christmas, who is interested in doing some work on Brook Street. And this is an application that he filled out that runs through Corey's office. And he has, I believe he is comfortable with this. So it's just a matter of having the board saying that you're comfortable with Christmas Motors adopting it. And one of the things that we do, if you've noticed on 27, heading away from Town Hall on the right, there's a small sign on the right that says maintained by the Shoba Valley Neighbors. And this would probably have a similar sign, depending on how things go. So,
In addition to Brook Street, he also wants the entire length of Pope Road.
oh, there's two. Oh, okay. Entire length. Yes, seems that way.
And Strawberry Hill Road. So he has 3 requests in here.
So that's very similar to what you just talked about. Maybe he'll take care of the whole thing for us. If you'd like, I can get additional details, but the application is apparently for him to, or his company, to adopt those public roads and provide care and maintenance for them in accordance with the policies that we've adopted. That's what's being suggested.
So it's Brook Street, Pope Road, and Strawberry Hill Road. It's 3 streets Mr. Christmas wants to adopt and take that on?
Yes.
And this involves 4 cleanups per year. And anyone under 18 has to be accompanied by an adult. And they have to contact the DPW and the police before and after each cleanup. Further discussion? Dean?
Mr. Christmas is a close acquaintance of mine, and we spoke about this informally a couple of weeks ago. He does a lot of this work as a public service now anyway, and certainly if we can encourage him to do it, I think it's a great thing. We'd like to have more neighbors that want to volunteer for this, so I'd definitely be in favor of it.
David?
Yeah, I think this is a good idea too. I just wanted to check that if he bit off more than he could chew here, because Pope Road especially is a pretty long road, that, I presume that, if the maintenance wasn't happening, that the road would no longer be adopted or whatever. So somehow we take it back and potentially somebody else could adopt it. Is that in the guidelines as well?
If they're not living up to the their end of the bargain, yes, then we would separate the arrangement. Corey is comfortable with the proposed streets, and he would supervise, or he would oversee any work that the Mr. Christmas does.
Well, he lives on the corner of Strawberry Hill and Pope Road, so he already does that angle.
Yeah, he's been doing it for a while, apparently. So this is just formalizing the arrangement.
Is there a motion?
Move that we approve the,
Sorry, Jim?
Oh, hi, Jim Snyder Grant, West Acton. I just wanted to speak to this as one of the organizers of Acton Cleanup Week. Last year, we had a really good working relationship with the Neshoba Valley neighbors who had taken on a bunch of Main Street. And my only request of Mr. Christmas, I don't think needs to be part of any motion or anything, is just that one of their cleanups be during cleanup week, so that we can, have a single period of time when we try to do our best to clean up all the streets of Acton. The streets that he's proposing to clean are indeed relatively clean, which I assume is partly due to his current efforts. So it'd be great to have that be a recognized part of what happens in Acton. Brook Street, on the other hand, often has trash, and it's a bear to pick. So I'm really glad that there's someone who's willing to take on the responsibility. I don't like sending volunteers down Brook Street with no sidewalks. It's a narrow, somewhat windy street. So people who participate in the Adopt a Street program are required to have reflective vests that are provided by the town. And so I think it's the right way to get that particular tricky street cleaned. So just wanted to say I'm all in favor of this, and it really fits well with Acton Cleanup Week. Thanks.
Dean?
I'd move that we approve the application from Mr. Christmas for him to begin the Adopt a Street on Brook Street in its entirety, Pope Road in its entirety, and Strawberry Hill Road in its entirety.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, another easement, 647 Mass Ave, Homeowners Association, 2 Gregory Lane.
So this information was provided to you in the packet, and there was actually some supplemental information provided early today regarding the easement agreement, and it's also printed for you at your desks today. And if there are any questions about this, please let me know.
Is this the farmer's market situation? No. Jim?
Hi. So this is a trail easement that we started thinking about the moment Wright Hill became Acton's newest conservation land. The trail easement connects Wright Hill conservation land with Guggins Brook conservation land, going through private land owned by 2 different homeowners associations, one on the Mass Ave side and one on the Central Street side. The one on the Central Street side is where I live, at Half Moon Hill. So I'm speaking very much as a homeowner here, not as a former member of the Land Stewardship Committee, although it was while I was on that committee that we started thinking about this trail. It makes for a really nice woodsy connection between 2 different conservation lands and protects that trail corridor in perpetuity for the town to have the right to maintain a trail. So it makes for a really nice connection between a well-used conservation land and our newest conservation land, which is a lot of people haven't discovered yet. So I'm looking forward to being able to work on blazing the trail and adding it to our map so that people can understand the connections between Wright Hill and Guggins Brook and the Jenks conservation land as well.
Just a question for Jim. What is the second group of homeowners that are?
Oh, the Mass Ave homeowners, I don't remember the number. It's probably in your papers. I don't have them in front of me. But basically it's the homeowners that live on Gregory Lane, which is a short street that comes up from Mass Ave.
Okay.
Yeah.
That confused me. I saw your association. I wasn't clear on the other one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? David, you all set? Dean? Tara?
Yes, I live on Wright Hill, and I was concerned because I thought this was a play to reserve the property for New View's use, but no, in fact, it was for New View to assure that the public will always have access to those trails. Thank you very much. I'm very much in support.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, a motion that we, I move that we join in and sign our end of the easement agreement with the two homeowners associations.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Social media policy revised.
Thank you. Earlier this year, in January, the board approved a social media policy for the town to make sure that as we navigate this newer world of communicating with our community, that we do it with some parameters. And we've made some revisions based on some of our experience and some things that other communities are dealing with. It's primarily in section 3.4, I think it's, or 3.5 actually. And it just talks about how we handle information that is coming from nonprofits and non-town entities, and it just kind of frames how we can still help promote those, but it doesn't necessarily constitute an endorsement. And that is the biggest substantive change. We will update the names of the board members as well.
Any discussion, any questions? Is there a motion?
I move to accept the revised social media policy.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Now, North Acton Fire Station.
Thank you. Chief Hart and I will have a brief presentation, but as we did at the public forum earlier this week, or last week, we'd like to actually ask Selectman Dean Charter to kick us off, because he's has some context and some good information about this project. So if you don't mind getting us started.
Great, thank you. I think it's important that the public understand that this is not a recent project that was dreamed up, that it's addressing some long-standing issues. I'll give a couple of minutes, and certainly the chief can provide a lot of graphics that really point out these major points. Historically, Acton was a town of 3 villages: South Acton, West Acton, Acton Center. And all 3 of those villages had their own call fire departments. All 3 villages ended up with fire stations of one sort or another, which over the course of time were replaced. And we ended up with the assortment that we have right now. Those stations as call departments, unstaffed, worked quite well for many years. But you notice when you'll see on the plans that all 3 stations are located in the southern half of town, and that reflects the development pattern of the town. As early as the early 1970s, it became obvious that growth is going to continue in North Acton, and it has to be addressed as far as fire safety and later on EMS response. So in the 1970s, for instance, a parcel of land at the intersection of 2A and 27 was purchased for a potential fire station. Selectman Gardner was here about that time, and there was discussion, and it never went forward. Fast forward to about 2000, I was involved in a group that was looking at building a new public safety facility, which we did end up building at the location of the police station. And there was consideration of putting one big fire station right there to cover virtually the entire town. And that plan failed for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was it would have created response times that would have been worse than what we'd started out with. So went ahead and built central dispatch and fire administration onto the police station, and everybody has been quite happy with that. Again, in 2007, we took another stab at building a fire station at 2A and 27. That plan also sort of fell apart due to a lot of considerations, but one of them was that it was kind of determined that having a fire station at that busy an intersection would create some response time issues, and frankly, the station was not far enough north. So we actually at that time were looking at some sites on Harris Street. We didn't move on them, but there was certainly an awareness that we need something further north. So then a few years ago, the property that had been the headquarters of Fisheries and Wildlife became available, and the town was able to acquire it. And that pretty much checks all the boxes. Obviously, there are no perfect sites. There are certainly some drawbacks that people have raised about it as far as principally looking at road access, but none of those seem to be insurmountable. And so I think it's important for everybody to realize that, you know, we're kind of at the end of about a 50-year process. To put it in further context, to go way back in history, the villages in Acton, this village here that we're in 1863 was the site of a major conflagration which wiped out virtually all of Acton Center. And that's why we're sitting in a Victorian town hall rather than a colonial town hall. And then around 1910 or so, I'm sure the chief can correct me on the time frame, there was a similar conflagration in West Acton. So it was very important to have that fire safety, and that's really why we ended up with the assortment of stations that we've got. So hopefully 50 years have been long enough to wait.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having us. I'm Chief Robert Hart, your fire chief, and like Selectman Charter said, we've been helping formulate a plan for North Acton Fire Station. So a few updates as we go. Currently, our current deployment, we operate out of 3 stations and a fire admin office. So our fire admin office is the police station. Seems kind of weird that the fire chief's in the police station, but it's what it is. So Station 1 on the upper right-hand corner, upper left-hand corner operates our ambulance, an engine company, 2 firefighters, paramedics on the ambulance, 2 firefighter EMTs, and a lieutenant on an engine. Our Station 2, which is down on South Acton on School Street, houses our ladder truck. So it's important to note that currently the only station our ladder truck will fit in is Station 2. Height of the door and slope of the ramp, size of the building is all part of that factor. That station operates with 2 firefighter EMTs. It also houses our second ambulance, or a backup ambulance, so it's cross-manned with the ladder company. Station 3 is what used to be considered our headquarters and still houses our shift commander or our captain and 1 engine company, which also cross-mans a boat and our brush unit. So that's basically our current deployment as we know it today. And this is how we currently have divided up our town. Like Dean had mentioned, a lot of the stations are kind of toward the south end of the town. District 1, which is the district we're sitting in now, covers all the way up to North Acton. So it's a large district, and that increases our response time from our Station 1. Of an interesting note, the call departments way back when, or the volunteer departments, used to be very separate, even though they were called Acton Fire Departments. They would pride themselves on being able to put out a fire by themselves, and a lot of times would not call the additional help from Acton. They would call out-of-town companies in to help them, just so they could boast about putting the fire out. So existing stations, they're a little bit older as well, as Dean had mentioned. So, you know, our newest station, which is West Acton, built in 1961, we had 7,000 people in town when that station was built. And currently we have 23,000 people. And you'll see later on that a lot of that development is the north end of town. Some of our responses, way back in 1939, we responded to a whopping 21 emergencies. We didn't run the ambulance service back then, so it was strictly fire. And just this year, we're, you know, hovering around 2,600 emergency responses. And along with that, our population has grown quite a bit. Back in 1960, when our latest station was built, just over 5,000 people, and now we're at 23,000. So a lot has happened, and we haven't increased really anything. Our last increase in staffing was 1988, and our last station was built in 1961. So this is that population growth we were talking about. The purple, the darker purple, is really the 2000, year 2000 growth. And you can see that that's mainly in the North Acton district of town. So this is just some circles that the Insurance Service Office recommends for distance, allowable distance that a fire engine or a ladder can travel to be the first arriving company at a fire. So the smaller circle is 1.5 miles. Those circles are around our current 3 stations. And the larger circle is for the ladder company. And you can see that North Acton is severely underserved. These are some response data maps, which are really kind of difficult to read, but each one of those little circles on there represents an incident we had between 2011 and 2016. And it's really just trying to show the concentration over the last 5 years of where our incidents are. So it's a little difficult on this screen to read. But if you look kind of in the lower corner, you can see this is Route 2A, and we call this a heat map. That's where a large concentration of the incidents have occurred. I know Jim was asking about this at our last public forum, so this one's tricky to read. But really what we're trying to get out of this is current conditions with 3 stations, and we're seeing a lot of run volume in the 2A corridor and up in North Acton. And then our proposed redistricting, where a 4th station up in this area should, you know, will be able to handle a lot of these calls that we already respond to. So reducing response time is the overall picture. So a similar thing, this is response times, and the one on the left shows our current 3 stations, and the green indicates a really healthy, like 2-minute response time, and the mustard is more like 5, and the red is above 6. So I can tell you that the above 6 is more like 11 or 12 in this area. So this map is showing the Harris Street Fire Station and a, you know, projected response times from that station, giving us another green circle around a 4th station if we were to build it. In essence, bringing our response time in that area way down to really what the other 3 communities are used to having. So this is where you're going to take over, John. Sorry. So there you go.
So thank you. And 2018, the town approved moving forward with the site. There was a lot of work, as was mentioned, to try to figure out where it could go and where it should go. And the town decided at the 2018 town meeting that it will go to 68 Harris Street. And in doing so, approved $750,000 in design funds to move forward with the project. So that move would change the ISO circles we saw earlier to give us more adequate coverage in the north, as you can see here. So the site, 68 Harris Street, as Chief mentioned, is the former Fishery and Wildlife Office. And what we would do is we would demolish the brown building that you see in front if you've driven by it, but there's actually a garage in back that's in pretty good shape, so we'd keep that. And this is the site plan. showing the garage right here where I'm circling that we would keep. The station would be closer to the road. Parking for the staff would be out behind the garage. They don't have to drive and park all the way and back. This site was chosen because it's in an optimal location for response time, and based on the needs assessment that we talked about, it's a good site because we already owned it. It's a good site because although there are some challenges, we are able to lay it out in a way that minimizes the impact on the neighborhood. And it's also improving an abandoned property in town on Harris Street. This is the floor plan for the schematic design, what we've come up with for a floor plan. It's a 3-bay garage. 2 of the bays will be drive-through. 1 of the bays will be a back-end bay for the ladder. There'll be a lot of accessory equipment and mechanical and utility space to the left side of the apparatus bay. That's where the medicine storage will be and a lot of the other things that support the fire operations, but they're not sort of office-type things. Then on the other side of the building will be the locker rooms, the decontamination setup where you get rid of your the gear that you went out in, you can take it off there and leave it in a confined space and then move into the rest of the building in your street clothes. There'll be the day room and the exercise room and the bunk rooms. There'll be a watch room where staff would either have pre-planning activities or a watch for traffic or people coming through and just be ready to jump in and go. There'll be a small meeting room for training and other fire department functions that need a space like that. The size, it's a 12,300 square foot footprint, but there will be 2 mezzanines for mechanical equipment and storage that will bring the total square footage of the structure to 13,800. This is a conceptual rendering of the look and feel of the building based on the floor plan. This is the design that we've worked closely with the design review board. The design review board had some very early feedback to us about how this building should look, and we really took that into consideration, and when we brought it back to them, they had just a few minor suggestions for how to improve it, and overall they seemed to be pleased with the program. We've had a lot of public forums and talked to a lot of people, and there's been a lot of positive reactions to the look and feel of the space. So a question that comes up is how would you staff the station? This is again the slide we saw earlier with the current staffing, and what we would do is take all the people that are shown here and rearrange them slightly so that if you look at the bottom right corner, the new 4th station will have 1 lieutenant and 1 firefighter, and then there'll still be 2 firefighters at the other station, at the other 2 stations, and then 4 in the center. So the existing staffing can be reshuffled and the existing equipment can be reallocated to staff that station in the near term. And there will, of course, be discussions about whether any staffing can be added in the future, but it wouldn't be necessary out of the gate. Some of the things that the design team worked on and has been an issue that we really focused on based on the Board of Selectmen's policy approved earlier or later last year, the environmental sustainability. We're designing the structure to be all electric, not needing to tie into the natural gas system. We're doing a lot of work on the mechanicals, and we've gotten some great resident feedback and suggestions on some of the alternatives that we're considering, but what we're currently considering is a ground source geothermal heating system, which will be backed up by a small electric boiler, and it's high efficiency, low operating costs, 12-year payback, and it's very consistent with the goals outlined in the sustainability policy. We're also going to use the structure and the way it's aligned to take advantage of natural lighting in the apparatus bay. Those big garages, there's a lot that goes on in there, and if you can use the natural light, as you can see here, you can use the natural light to not to have as much, you won't need to have as much electric lighting inside with that during the day, which is an advantage. So the cost estimate. We just completed the schematic design and the schematic design cost estimate. Once the schematic design is completed, we send the package of information and the drawings to two cost estimators, one that the architect hires and one that the OPM hires. They both come up with what they think every line item in the building will cost. Then they sit down in a room and reconcile that. And that's the point that we're at now. And with that reconciliation, they've identified the total project cost to be $10.9 million. So that includes the design, the owner's project manager, all the fixtures, furniture, and equipment, and other soft costs. It also includes the design contingency, because at this point in the process, there are things that we just haven't gotten into the detail to be able to design. So we always carry a contingency to make sure that as they come up, we already have funding to make those details work. We also have a construction contingency, and we're planning on escalation because construction industry is rapidly escalating. We're also right now in the process of looking at value engineering concepts. It's important what we're doing with value engineering is we're looking at ways that we can reduce the cost of the project but not compromise the mission or the program of the building. This is the Board of Selectmen's goal from the last few years, and it's something that we want to build that will last and be a productive and useful facility for 50 years. So we want to make sure that we build it the right way. A lot of questions came up at the Finance Committee last week about why the cost is 10.9 for the total project cost. So this slide is just meant to break down what was presented a few years ago and where we are now. When the town approved the design costs in 2018 for $750,000, it was presented that the construction would be $7.5 million. So at that time, they hadn't, the total cost of the project we were considering was $8.25 million. With escalation and other things that have happened since then, and the addition of all the necessary furnishing, fixtures, and equipment and soft costs, we had to add about $1.4 million for things that were just, it's too early to have a solid number at that point. So we now have the schematic design completed and we have a lot more information. So construction cost is estimated to go up from 7.5 to 8.4. The design cost went up because we had to hire an OPM and the other reasons. And so overall, it went from 8.25 to 10.9. And again, we're still working on that number to try to bring it down. So we're finalizing the budget and trying to bring it into a position that we can bring it to the board and have the board put it on the forward at special town meeting in December. And it's currently being considered a proposal as a debt exclusion, which would also require a ballot vote. So if the project ends up being 9.5 million, which is what we had programmed into the budget last year, if you borrow that over 30 years, it's approximately $550,000. There's a lot of work that we're doing to look at interest rates and bonding strategies and financial analysis. So just generally, at this point, we're estimating the average cost to a single-family household to be $65 to $75. These are numbers that we'll be refining over the next few weeks, and we hope to continue to provide updates both to this board and to the Finance Committee and to ALG, just so everybody understands exactly where we are with the cost. And then, so we're just working towards town meeting. If the project is approved, we would finalize the design and bid documents and put it out to bid in the spring and hopefully start construction before the fall. And it would probably be a 12 to 16, 18-month project. So that would bring us to 2021 or early 2022. But that information is still being finalized as well. So that's where we are. And any questions or comments?
Thank you, John. David?
Yeah, yes, one question for you, Mr. Manager. Okay, and then a couple questions for the chief. The 9.5 number, I assume, is the 10.9 project cost minus the money we've already appropriated for design, minus any value engineering items, and that's just a rough estimate at this point.
That's right. That's where we're hoping to end, but we're trying to be very clear to you that we're currently at 10.9. We may not be able to get it down there. get down, so it's 10.9 minus the 750,
Right.
and we still have a gap to make up.
And then that value engineering.
And we may not make up the gap in a way that preserves the project mission and programming goals, but we're working hard at that right now.
Sure, great, thank you. And Chief, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Is the size of this proposed station sufficient such that if at some point in the future we were refurbing one of the other stations, that this one has enough room to hold the equipment and the staff temporarily during some refurbishment of the other stations?
Yes, we looked at that to handle a remodel, along with some of the other stations. I'm not sure we can take one whole station and put it in this one, but we're comfortable that we'll be able to reallocate resources accordingly.
And vehicles?
Correct.
And the one other question is just a curiosity question on my part. The paramedics are currently in the central station, so they can respond to any district, is that correct?
That is correct. Our primary ambulance is out of this station here, centrally located. Our backup ambulance is located at Station 2 in School Street.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, John?
Thank you, Dean and Chief and John. One of the piece that's crucial to this that we have heard at all of the public forums is the addition of a sidewalk as part of this project, not down the line, but now going from the Harris and Main Street intersection down to Alexandra Way. It's about a half mile. I was glad, John, that you followed up on it and had Corey York walk that and take a hard look at it. And from what he reports, it does not seem to be a complicated sidewalk to, build out. I realize it's going to be an additional cost. Safety's crucial here. There are, young in the Monument Place neighborhood. There's just a host of young families there, and it's something we've got to do, even if the cost, increases. So I think that's something we've got to build in, and for you people to continue to work on. The two other questions that we get in both the public forums and the private groups outreach we're starting on is if this is all based on response times, will one of the older stations be sacrificed? I think as a matter of equity and also for the success of this project, our board needs to come out with a statement. I realize we can't bind future boards, but we are for the maintenance of 4 fire stations throughout the town. And in taking that position, we've got to be upfront and say to keep the other stations going, they will have to be rehabbed and improved probably over the next 10 or 15 years. And the second piece of that is right now we're going to maintain the stations with the existing staff. And I know the chief would wish to add staff, but we'd have to look at, I think we have to look to add staff within the operating budgets we're going to be working on over the next 3, 4, 5 years, but that's important too. I would plan to bring a motion before the board at our meeting on October 21st to have the board adopt positions on both the 4 stations and the, adding firefighters.
John?
Did you say 10/21? The 10/21 meeting, is that what you said?
The 10/21 meeting.
Is there anything in particular you'd like us to prepare for that, or just continue with the work that we're doing?
Continue the work you're doing. I just want the board to get out in front on an issue that we are getting a lot of questions from the public on, so we are very clear and not being squishy or anything like that, to be affirmative and out front. 4 fire stations will be maintained with the understanding that there will need to be improvements made in the years ahead, and that we do look to fire staff within the, within budgetary constraints and the like.
Any further discussion? David?
If I could just comment on what John said. I think, voting on the 4 fire station plan is on October 21st is good. The staff, I'm wondering if it needs a little bit more analysis, and I don't think that, we could bind the hands of a future board anyway. And so I'm just wondering about that, because it seems to me to maybe need a little bit more analysis than could be done by October 21st. I know I would have questions on that. So I don't mind saying that, that we would operate within the normal operating budget constraints or whatever. But if you thought that we needed to be not squishy about the types of staff we would need in the future, I'm wondering whether we could do that in a month's time. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it's just the position of this board. We're not binding future boards in that vote. It's just the intention.
But even in this board, I don't know, I could have an opinion on what kind of staff we would need. For example, more paramedics versus firefighters, or firefighter paramedics, or, what kind of staff the department might need. I don't know if the chief even knows that. And it seems to me to be very aggressive to decide that. So I didn't know what level of specificity you were expecting in terms of staff in a month's vote.
I'll be careful how I craft the motion that I'll present.
Because I would, personally, I think the forestation thing is a good idea, but and I think, obviously the staff has to, be in proportion to increasing the needs and things of the town, and I don't have any problem with that, but I just wouldn't, I'm not sure that there's enough time to decide what kind of staff is necessary.
It's just the goal of increasing the staff, because I think that's what the chief, would like to do. We have, 41 firefighters, and that's been the same number since 1988 or 89. And we are building the North Acton station to house 6 firefighters. So, the question they're going to get is, well, if you're really not going to increase staff, could we make the station a little smaller, instead of building for 6, build for 3? And you don't want to have that conversation.
Right, and I think that's important. One of the reasons I asked the chief is, if we're refurbing one of the other buildings, and the refurbishment takes a year or 9 months or whatever it is this big enough to hold to temporarily redeploy the equipment and stuff? So, thank you.
So, John, are you making a motion?
No, I intend to present a motion at the meeting on October 21st.
Oh.
On those 2 points.
Okay. Consent, Jim?
Just had a comment and a comment about the fire station. First thing is, I'm just very proud that you've gone ahead and designed a fire station that doesn't have a, poisonous and explosive gas going into the building. That seems really wise for a fire station. You've talked before about the environmental advantages of that as well, which I'm all about as well. But I think it's also a nice statement about how you can do buildings without pumping in methane. The other question I had was about one of the advantages of a system like a ground source heat pump and a well-insulated building is you're going to have much lower operating costs, electrical costs, utility costs. And I wonder at what point in the process do we have an estimate of the utility costs? Now, apparently there is something like that, because there's a statement that there's a 12-year payback for the ground source heat pump, which I assume is reflecting the lower operating cost of a ground source heat pump compared to a conventional heating system. But I wondered if that kind of operating cost was going to be published at some point.
John?
So as I mentioned, we have been working a lot on the cost alternatives and the life cycle costs and the energy consumption in schematic design phase, you really don't have the details of the space and how it'll be used and the doorways and all the things that go into calculations like that, but we're using industry standards based on square footage and all the institutional knowledge that our architectural firm and owner's project management firm has from the dozens of fire stations and public buildings that they work on. So I think that we're going to continue refining that information. We will not have, I don't know when we'll have the exact energy consumption estimates, but we're getting closer every day.
Thanks. And the last statement was in terms of the sidewalk. The last time I reviewed the sidewalk design guidelines, they were really nice pedestrian guidelines. They weren't necessarily appropriate for like kids on bikes. And some of the concerns that have been expressed by residents are about the bicycle traffic on that road. So I'd encourage Corey or whoever's following up on a potential sidewalk design to think about what it takes to make that an actual complete street, according to our complete streets policy, to be able to have safe passage for bicycles as well as pedestrians. Thanks.
Thank you. Tara?
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Jim says about everything he said. And I want to point out that to do appropriate planning, that we've got to look at what is build out also, if it's going to be the next 50 years, how many people will there be then? Because if we had, for example, we charge a sidewalk fee, we could be charging a fire station fee, we could be charging an open space fee to contribute to the capital expenditures required to build and maintain a sustainable town. So if new growth paid for itself, the fire station would be free. So it's not free. So I think looking forward, we should really be responsible enough to understand how many people do we expect over the planning period, and be conscious about our opportunity, or if we choose not to, at least to be conscious that we can charge for every new unit a contribution to a fund to pay for some of these expenditures. I am very much in support of a new fire station because the people are here. So, you can't say, well, geez, they could be here, they could build their own fire station. No, we've allowed the building, and as a community, we've got to provide the services in an equitable fashion. Thank you.
David?
Can I just make a comment about the energy to Jim's question? Because a number of people have asked me about it, including members of the Finance Committee and other things. And I just wanted to make it clear why the building doesn't use natural gas, in addition to the fact that it's an explosive gas, as Jim says. For energy use in buildings, a little bit different than transportation, but for energy use in buildings, really only electricity can be made carbon-free. And at this point, where we are in the country and in the world, we don't want to we create a vicious circle with natural gas infrastructure. If we build new buildings that use natural gas, we have to make more natural gas infrastructure. So it's not possible to retrofit every old building, but we certainly don't want to build a new building that uses natural gas. It's kind of, if we did that, we'd be locking ourselves into a more than 50-year time frame of using natural gas, and we really don't want to do that. Finally, we do have that rough analysis that the town manager alluded to, and it does cost us more to build the ground source heat pump, but it is so efficient that it pays for itself twice over during the time that the bonds will be paid off, roughly. Again, given that the current analysis is not perfect, but still, roughly, it pays for itself twice. So assuming the bonds get paid off in 25 years, the amount of money that we save in energy costs is twice what it costs to install an efficient system.
All right, anything else? Consent calendar? Meeting minutes, September 9th, 2019. Green Communities Grant Supplemental Funding Request, Interior LED Lighting Upgrade, 50 Audubon Drive, Municipal Properties Department. one-day alcoholic beverage license, True West Brewing, Inc., Gardner Field, September 28th, 2019, Octoberfest. One-day alcoholic beverage license, Theater 3, multiple dates. Request for use of public roads on your marks, October 6th and November 29th, 2019. Accept gift Recreation Department for $100 from David and Susan Kidd for funding a new recreation facility and playground at Jones Field. And request to dispose of obsolete items, Acton Memorial Library. None of these were held, so is there a motion?
Move to approve consent items 9 through 15 inclusive.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Is there any further business to be conducted?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.